Good morning, everybody. Morning, Matt. Welcome to ISCF Driving the Electric Revolution, Building Regional Centres of Excellence. Some of you will know me, some of you won't, but I'm sure we'll get to know each other a little bit better as the day goes on. Just to preview the agenda, you're going to get a short talk from me on what the KTN can offer. We've got Matt Boyle at 10:40 giving an update on DER, Ben Chesterton at 11, actually on the competition scope, 11:30 Bimber on the competition process itself. That's where you need to pay some attention because it's not a standard IFS form to fill out, so please listen. And then we've got an open Q&A at about 12 o'clock, followed by lunch. For those of you who've got one-to-one surgeries booked, you should have it on the back of your name badge, the time and the table on which you'll be hosted. I think we'll be finished by about 14:40 for the surgeries. The surgeries will be with Ben Chesterton and Martin Charrington, and and Matt will be hovering around if you need to find him. So, just very briefly, what does the KTN do? We're the networking partner of Innovate UK. We are tasked with building networks and connecting people is one of our principal objectives, particularly finding partners for project consortium building, for supply chain development, and driving new connections and articulating challenges, and generally being creative about the way we connect industry with academia and vice versa. We also have an access to funding and finance activity where we actually disseminate some of the awareness of new funding. We give advice on project structure, advice on proposal development, and follow up as well. So quite often we get involved towards the tail end of a project when there's an opportunity for follow on as well. We also, I don't call it influence, I call it informing. We do actually promote some industry needs into government, particularly Innovate UK, latterly into UKRI more generally. We certainly work on informing strategy with these agencies, and we also communicate trends and drivers. And I think with that, I'm not going to go into the last two categories. I will pass over to Matt Boyle, who will take questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Paul. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Excellent. Yeah, it's getting better. It's taken me a year. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Matt Boyle, it says on the slide. I am the Interim Challenge Director for Driving the Electric Revolution, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Centres competition. Anybody who thinks I'm here for any other reason, the door's there. Okay, so the aims of today, to bring you up to speed with where the challenge is at, to give you guidance with the help of Paul and KTN, answer any questions you've got. For me, they have to be simple and straightforward, because that's what I am. And then last but by no means least, the networking opportunity that this meeting affords you. So today's aims are those and nothing more. I have to, because of the role I play, talk to you about the industrial strategy. Theresa May's government developed the industrial strategy. Greg Clark published it. Essentially 5 pillars. Those of Those of you who have heard this presentation before know that on the next slide, I identify with 3 of the pillars of the industrial strategy: clean growth and future mobility, which is driving the electric revolution. AI and data economy, not really a focus for this competition and this challenge, but I think everybody in the room will recognise that without it, it's going to be very difficult to deliver. So the only one I don't identify with is the ageing society, because I'm only 25. There are some people who haven't heard that joke before. So, driving the electric revolution, the overview. Now, I apologise for all of you in this room who have seen this multiple times, but there are some people in the room who have never seen it. So, here goes. Definition: power electronics, machines and drives. For you, on the left-hand side of the screen is a power module. That particular one, I think, is a Mitsubishi power module, and it's probably silicon. But that's what we mean by power electronics. We're looking at silicon carbide, gallium nitride, the basic switching technology, basic switching materials. Machines, we're talking about the rotating object in the transmission or in the vehicle or in the application, the thing that turns. We are agnostic as to its size and the technology that goes to construct it. So switch reluctance, PMAC, brushed, brushless, all of it is included. And last but by no means least, what I am known for. Because Sevcon was one of the foremost developers of drives for off-highway and automotive until it was bought by Borg Warner 2 years ago. And the drive is the power electronics, various bits of control electronics around it, the logic and the software. It's the intelligent bit. So, driving the electric revolution. We have a mission statement. Every challenge should have one. So, in the development of the challenge, we told the government it was possible to create £5 billion more power electronics, machines and drives in the UK by 2025. If we covered 7 sectors. Martin, start thinking. But we have to collaborate. Academia, industry, we cannot do it separately. The challenge is too big. So what are the 7 sectors? Martin. I'll do it for him. Automotive, aerospace, energy, the generation and distribution and consumption, off-highway, industrial drives, marine and rail. Not necessarily in that order. Why are we interested in those 7 sectors specifically? Well, a year and a half ago now, our government got on the bandwagon of decarbonisation, and they passed policy that said we were going to be zero carbon on the road by 2040. We were going to be taking diesel out of rolling stock by 2040, and we were going to do more aviation, hybrid and electric aircraft by 2040. And latterly, our old Prime Minister said that we would be carbon neutral by 2050. Absolutely no idea how to achieve it. No plan for achieving it, in fact. So along comes Innovate, doing its job, and appoints a group of individuals, most of whom are sitting on the left-hand side here. My left, your right. And they are the team that constitutes driving the electric revolution. A piece of the puzzle in delivering on those policies. Across 7 sectors, I've already mentioned, in technologies that are ubiquitous. So how are we going to deliver the challenge? There are 5 pillars. As I've said to people in the past, focus on the red. So really about enabling cross-fertilization of solutions, ensuring we don't repeat and waste time. Covering all the PEMD life cycle, so including recovery. Build new supply chains to support the increase in electrification. I don't need to tell anybody in this room the demand for electrification is incredible. The ability to deliver it is paltry in comparison. We need to fix that. Or we are going to lose out to other people who are doing it faster, pouring lots more money into it, but really don't have the intellectual property at the product level. Prototyping and scale-up is what it says. We've identified where there is capability, we need to create more of it. And last but by no means least, we are short of skilled people. So how do we create more skilled people? Well, a couple of things we can do. One of them is retraining people in the internal combustion engine supply chain to deliver on power electronics machines and drives. This is very stilting for me because normally, as you know, I wander around, but there's a camera at the back there that has me plastered on the web over there, so I have to stand here, and it's becoming a bit uncomfortable. So forgive me if I rattle through some of this now. So the National Centres of Excellence is the reason we're all here. We're putting £30 million into an establishment of centres between 2 and 4 across the country. National centres regionally located. They are going to get support, be supported by industry. It is extremely important that industry leads this. Essential, I would say. In the fullness of time, probably in the spring of next year, we're going to do some more collaborative research projects. And those will be focused on low volume, high value supply chains and on high volume, high efficiency supply chains. So there are 4 objectives, really, for the challenge. The first one is to leverage the IP. I mentioned earlier on that we are very good at product IP. We are one of the leading locations in the world for development of machines and drives, including software, but we don't manufacture it here. And that's something that needs to change. We already have world-leading capability in this country, but it's small and it's hidden. And one of the things we've been doing over the last year is surfacing it and trying to help it grow. Thirdly, I have in the room industrialists, I have in the room academia. There are people like Paul, for example, who are great networkers. Collaborative research, collaborative development is what this is all about. Industry can't do it on its own, it's demonstrated that, but academia can't do it on its own either. So creating the collaboration, the cooperation across the country in the centres. And then last but by no means least, we have to fill the skills gap, because without the skilled people, all of this is for naught. So I mentioned that this has to be led by industry. The centres are actually for industry. Somebody was talking to me earlier on about, the capital requirements and the kit and so on and so forth. And yes, that's important, but the fundamental important aspect of this is capability. You have to demonstrate capability. We want to bring industry to capability. Industry needs capability. So the activities in the centres will be led by industry. There is no fundamental research. We're not funding fundamental research. We do need academia and industry to work on developing processes and the supply chain. That's what this is about. To conquer the world. The other thing that we have to say is that the UKRI team will be monitoring the centres, what they're doing, how they're doing, and lending support. So, in an £80 million budget, the centres is 30 million of it, and there is £6 million for training. We haven't included training in this call, so there is £6 million being held in reserve, but we see that the centres will play an important and large part in the delivery of those trainings. We need, because we're spending government money, to ensure we have value for money, and we will expect to get regular reports from the centres on how they're doing and what they're up to. And they must have an evaluation framework in place, and that will be done in cooperation with the wider Challenge programme. I said you get support from the central team. So Innovate will provide the grant funding, monitor it. It will expect to see industry investment, and we will be looking at the bids for the consortium and how much support they're getting from industry. We will have observers, not sure who yet, but we will have the observers in the centres as well. And we will require an annual business plan. And then somebody, lucky person, will get to join the programme board, which meets quarterly. Challenge Q&A. Are there any questions? Morning, Ben. How are you? You are. Are there any questions for me? Are there any on the web? No. Okay. In that case, I'll hand over to Ven Chesterton. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's nice to be back. Well, sort of. So, next bit, I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about the competition scope. So what we need to see from you if you're going to be the winning consortia. Just before we do that, though, I want to take a moment to say 18 plus months ago, I think, a lot of people around this room sat in a room Gary hosted, and we talked about why we maybe want to put a Wave 3 bid in around power electronics, machines and drives. And we are here today still alive. There was 251 Wave 3 bids, and 9 plus potentially a 10th are going to be funded. So we've done incredibly well to get to this stage. One thing we asked of you then, and we've asked of you continually throughout, is support us, and we, as in the team that Matt talked about, are on your side. We're your voice within Innovate UK, within UKRI, and within BEIS and government. We have argued continually for the money that we now have. We have vouched and pushed and put our reputations on for this. And one of the core components of the Stevenson Challenge, as was now the Driving Electric Revolution, was the centres. That was at the heart of everything we did, really. The other bits are very useful, so the funding calls are useful, but the centres were the core of it. And today, or a couple of days ago, we launched the competition brief. And so now I'm going to talk to you through that. I think If there's three main takeaways, I mean, there's a lot in there. I'll talk about that in a sec. Three main takeaways. First of all, they are national centres of excellence. We might have said the word regional in there, but these need to be, even if they're located, obviously going to be located in a geographic location, but national. So Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, the whole of the UK, national centres. The second one is we really need to see evidence. We have been asking for evidence from the very beginning that we can take back to Treasury, to Bays, to our Lords and Masters around why us putting money in gets the return. So evidence of the £82 million match is vital for a winning consortia. Really strong evidence, and I'll leave that to you to work out how you provide that to us. We can give you pointers, but we need that evidence. And the other one is the front door. So this, we don't expect, and the reason why we want these centres to be joined into one is because we want that really clear front door, that really clear business development team that are going to go out and make sure these centres are fully utilised and are used by the right people. That's internationally, locally, nationally. So I apologise in advance for the next few slides. There's a lot in there. The reason why is because experience tells us that people use these slides to write their bids rather than the text that we provide. Don't do that. Don't use the slides to write the bids. But people do use it as a guide. So we've tried to stuff it with as much information as possible. So it is a bit dry, and apologies for that. I'll try and pick out the most interesting bits from each slide for you. And then the other thing to say is there will be an FAQ list at the end of this. So we are taking notes from your questions, and we will answer them as best we can and share them with everybody who's in the room today. We've actually already had a couple of emails come through, thank you, with some questions, and so they are included in the FAQ list. So if there's anything that you don't think of today or you don't want to ask in front of everyone else, if you email us with that question, we'll add it to the FAQ and we'll distribute that whenever we've got the answers for them. So, yes, so the reason why we stuffed them through is full of information is because they will be made available, and we anticipate you using them as a bit of a guide for writing your bids, even though you must look at the full text because we can't cover it all up in slides. So, the aim. I think a lot of people in the room know this. It's about establishing a network of flagship physical centres. That's what it says there. I mean, what we're less interested in is new buildings. But it's about the existing facilities we have, putting in the right equipment and right people and skills to use that equipment to assist industry. What they need to be doing is the development and scale up. So we're not really interested in this fundamental research. It's about development and scale up. The market is moving rapidly. For us to keep pace with it, the global competitive market, development and scale up is what we're talking about. This isn't me saying this. This is the community asking us and telling us to say this. Fundamental research is not something we're interested in, so please don't talk about that in great detail. So the 7 industry sectors, which, Martin, you got off scot-free last time, but there's a mic just there. So if I get stuck though, Martin. So we've got off-highway agriculture, we've got automotive, we've got aerospace, we've got industrial drives, we've got marine, we've got energy, and rail. There we go. So you don't need to be an expert in any one of those or all of those, but we need you to have some access to each of those 7 sectors one way or another, all the way from tier N to the OEM, so right the way through the supply chain. We need you to be helping SMEs all the way through to the larger companies develop and scale new technologies. Now, this is a really key point. So we have got £30 million. We have fought tooth and nail to get you that £30 million. I'm sorry it's not more. And everyone, that's the first question I get asked is, how are you expecting to do this with that much money? That's what we've got. We're fighting, we're still fighting, we're continuing to fight for more, but at this stage, it's what we've got. We have asked you to leverage 82 million from that 30 million by March 2024. Okay, I'm expecting there to be questions on that. I'll hold those for later. It's really important. The winning consortia, one of the big areas that you're going to get judged on is how well you answer that question. So we need to see that, we need to see evidence of that, and yeah, that's just the way it is. The other one is about your ability to start quickly. So if you already have things in the pipeline and this is going to assist with that, or is this going to accelerate that, then talk about that. If you explain to us how you're going to get this up and running, because again, Matt's talked about it, the speed in which this industry is moving requires this to go in quickly. So centres, as discussed, open access. That might cause a challenge for some areas, but it does need to be open access. This isn't us saying this. We can't give you the funding. We can't fund these things if they're not open access. There's state aid rules in place that we have to see them being open access. They need to work with all parts of the supply chain. So, as I said before, SME to OEM, across those 7 sectors, open to them all. And this front door I talked about needs to be going out actively to each of these different sectors. Needs to be based on the needs of the users, because otherwise they're not going to be using your sensors, so bear that in mind. So there are going to be funding calls. You will get assistance from us to operate your sensors through the funding calls if you're successful, but they're going to be open, those funding calls. But we expect you to be doing a lot of this work without our assistance, essentially, once we've funded the sensors. So, and this is really important, during the process over the last 18 months, we have been told continually, do not build new buildings, do not build new centres, do not place lots of money in the hands of people that aren't necessarily the right people, the best people to use that quickly and effectively. So we've now put in place what you've asked us to do, which is build on existing centres of excellence. You'll be scored on your ability to do that. So show us what you're doing at the moment and how our funding is going to assist with that, rather than, I'm not doing this at the moment, your funding will help us set this up. That's not what we're interested in. So it's your capabilities, your existing capabilities within your organisation, within your consortia partners. We obviously want to see universities, centres, etc. So we want to see you working with the fundamental research. We don't expect you to be undertaking that. And if what you're proposing is next door to another centre that's doing something very similar, then that is not going to look very good. So we're expecting this not to replicate capability that we already have. We don't have the resources. As mentioned before, the amount of money we have doesn't allow us to replicate or be inefficient with that funding. So we're asking you, and that's part of the reason why we've asked for we've got one call rather than a number of different calls around these centres, because we want you to work out how you're going to do it without replicating existing capability. So then this commitment to work with other partners, extremely important. As well as that, a commitment to work with partners and people that aren't necessarily part of your consortia. So if you are to win, how in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time are you going to ensure that you have room and have an ability to allow other unfunded partners to work with you? We need to see something around that. So this front door, it is vital. That's probably, I would say, the most important reason why we haven't gone for a number of different calls around the centres. We've got it as one, because we need to have the ability to go to the international market and say, this is, if you're interested in PEMD, these are the people to speak to. Everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. We might ask you to work with other partners that are unfunded to assist with that. So we need that one simple process. If someone turns up at a centre in one location, but actually they should be working at the other centre because what they're doing is more relevant to that, you need to be immediately signposting them in that direction. That's what we're talking about. You need to be going out and actively developing the business, both nationally and internationally. And that's what we mean by a front door business development team that's working as one. We need to see that. We need to see how you plan on doing that. So the users, you need to be going out and actively finding them. This is fundamental to this. We we think, and this is again based on what you've been telling us over the last 18 plus months, somewhere between 2 and 4 centres located regionally, so obviously they're going to have geographic locations, but they are UK, they are national centres of excellence. So it doesn't mean that we just need to fund work going on in 3 buildings or 2 buildings or however many you choose. They could be many, many, many locations, but they need to have some kind of cluster around them, some kind of presence that allows people to see that that's the centre, that's one of the front doors that we're interested in. So as it says here, a small number of sites, but it's for you to tell us the best delivery mechanism. If you think what we're saying here isn't correct, then feel free to talk to us about it and propose something different. But we see this as the way it's going to work and the best way for it to work, based on the feedback we've had from you over the last 18 months. So there's some technical things here. So it has to be UK registered business, research organisation or RTO. This point about leverage industry investment, we can't tell you how important that is. Without that being demonstrated to us, we won't be able to select you as a winning consortia. The clear industry support, partly that will be letters of support, etc., and evidence that you can leverage industry funds, but also just clear industry support in what you're doing, what you're planning on building. So those industries that are nearby, geographically located near to your centres, we need to know that they're interested in what you're doing. And it goes without saying, expertise in PEMD. We don't want to fund you working out how you're going to do this over the next 2 or 3 years. You need to be hitting the ground running. And so you need to demonstrate that you know what you're doing. There's a point here that academic institutions cannot work alone here. We're not expecting to see that. And the work you will be doing has to be through one of those other organisations I've mentioned. So again, a couple of points here. We can't fund things outside of the UK really. UK based. So although we've got £30 million, we expect to see total eligible cost of £50 million. We expect all of our funding and our investment to have ended, it has to have ended by 2024, based on us starting next year, so it's a 4-year programme. That does not mean it's the end, so we will stop funding you, but we need to see evidence that 6 years after that, so 10 years in total, we will have these centres operational and these centres working. So we want to kickstart it, we want to get it going, but it needs to be self-sustaining after a few years. And we need to see, again, evidence that you're going to be able to do that and you're going to be able to maintain that. So we've got, as said, £30 million, and we need to see you leverage £82 million. I can appreciate it's not simple, but we need to see that. It's what we've been asked to do. So this slide here is the what we mean by the co-investment, some examples. I'm not going to read this slide off. I'm going to allow you to digest it because it's fairly self-evident, and I don't trust myself not to get it slightly wrong if I read it to you. And again, happy to take questions on this at the end. And we've already actually had a couple of FAQs that we've got prepared for this for afterwards. So, to be clear, we're not funding collaborative research and development projects. Okay, that's not what we're doing here. They come later. So we expect, there already has been the fast start, and we expect there to, so we will be sharing these slides, so don't have to take notes or anything else if you don't want to. So we don't expect that will come later. There will be funding available for that, but at this stage it's the centres that we're interested in. We don't want to fund anything that duplicates or is a conflict with the existing centre. We don't want something that's going to require IFC funding for a new building. So we don't want to be funding bricks and mortar. We've talked about that, and that has been fed back to us since the beginning. This point about skills and training, there is going to be a need for skills and training. Don't talk about that in your bid. You can allude to it because we know there's a further £6 million and we expect you as a winning consortia to help us work out how best to spend that £6 million, but that's not what we're asking for right now. And then the open access nature of it is fundamental, okay? So, key points. The top three that I mentioned at the beginning are the key points, but these are what we want you to tell us. So, how are they going to build on existing investments? How are they going to make those world class? So, we already are in many ways world class when it comes to research and development. We want to be world class when it comes to the scale up and productionization. So, how are we going to do that? So, why are you and your organisations best placed to deliver these centres, these national centres located in regional locations? Why are you best placed to do that? What are you going to invest as well as, you know, the ISCF, the Bayes money? So how does it align with what you're doing either already or what you're planning on doing? How does it align with your capacity and your knowledge, your capabilities? Tell us about your co-investment from industry and any other sources you might have co-investment from. Tell us about your operating model over the next 10 years. How are you going to work with users of the centres all the way from your one-man bands up to your major multinational OEMs? The support you've had and the work you've done in the past, what equipment you've got, how can you demonstrate why the industry needs what you're planning on investing in? We need information on that. And then how are you going to work within the ecosystem? So you might not, all your partners might not include the whole ecosystem. So how are you going to work with those bodies that are outside of your consortia as well as the bodies inside your consortia? So happy to take questions at this stage. We are noting down the questions we get, and if we can't answer today, we will provide answers as quickly as we can. We appreciate a lot of you are in the middle of writing bids, so happy to take questions at this stage. There's a mic, or if you want to just shout. I don't see why we can't just get them out this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We might want to tie them up with the Q&A, so it may take a little longer than that, but yeah.
Just a quick question. You mentioned just towards the end of that, don't talk about funding for skills and training. In the guidance for applicants, in the documentation, it does say about capabilities and skills and capability. Is that, I mean, we would envisage we talk about the skills that's readily available to deliver the capability.
So what we're talking about there is the skills that you have. And so specifically, we have got £6 million that we held back for you to put together some kind of training, whatever that might be. That's not about upskilling your technicians. That £6 million is about upskilling, you know, the broader industry and people within it. So work you're going to do with your people within your centres, you can talk about that.
Gary, it's kind of a technical question, apologies. The 20% restriction on economic activity, can you explain a bit more about that? What's counted in the 20% and what's counted in the other 80%?
I think we'll give you a proper answer to that, but broadly speaking, the reason behind that is if you're setting up small runs for whatever it might be, a new production process, you might want to run that for a while, and as the organisation that you're working with is setting up their own centre to scale that or whatever, you might continue to be supplying that. So we don't want to restrict you from being able to undertake that activity and make money out of that. That's not what we're trying to do. So that's the gist behind that. But it might be easier to send that question in, and then we can properly reply to it. But that's the rationale behind it.
Yeah, I can see it's to do with state aid restrictions
Yeah.
and so on, but I wasn't clear where, and I understand if you make something and sell it to somebody, that's clearly an economic activity in that scope, but if you do some development work for a company and they fully pay for it, does that then count as commercial work as well, that would be in that 20% or not? Or where do you draw that line exactly?
Yeah, I think the best thing for you to do is send in that question, or we can take that away and get back a proper answer to that question. It's tied up in state aid. Some of our questions around the state aid requirements and questions we'll have to push back and say, you tell us how you're going to get around that, because it's not for us to explain how the state aid rules to yourselves. But yeah, if you ask us that question, we'll get back to you as best we can.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. It's a tricky one. Sorry
Yeah.
to put you on the spot.
No, not at all.
Just on this scope then, it seems very different to conventional Innovate UKRI bids. And I think that from listening to what you're saying, is absolutely critical that in the bid deliveries you get, we look at something we're not looking for a standard CR&D thing. This is bid that is different to all the others.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that those are very focused on what we're asking for here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. That's a really good point. Thank you for raising that. So when we go to the next section, competitions process, it's not like a competitions process you would have seen before. It's not the standard 10 questions, etc. It's a completely different process. Well, not completely different, but it's a different process because of exactly that. We're not UKRI or Innovate UK. We're very good at running basic CR&D processes. Is not what we're talking about here. Absolutely.
Then what can we do to speed up the timescale? Because I was quite shocked to see an 18-month to start up. I mean, if I was making this investment, and there was no new buildings involved and the facilities was there, I'd be rather shocked we had to wait for 18 months before it started. I mean, why is it so long? Can it not be much shorter? And couldn't that actually be a challenge to put into the bidding team?
That's not about it. We could have put strings around it like that. It's for the consortia to tell us how quickly they're going to set up. If they can set up in a week, go for it. We'd love to see that. Gary, you're nodding? Yeah? But if you can set up in a week, then we'd love to see that. But we accept that some bids might take a bit longer than that. And it may be that your first bit's online in a few months, but your last bit maybe takes a bit longer than that. So we need to allow for that. But yeah, you're right. If you can do it quicker or as fast as you can do it, that's better.
Matt, I know from our industry's perspective, setting up a supply chain in the semiconductor industry is a very expensive business, very expensive. And so the way our industry looks at it is a very rapid expansion of the supply chain with, investment on hundreds of millions. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And that's the way they're thinking about this industry. You just look at the investment Cree have made now over the last couple of weeks. It's 1.5 billion US just in the silicon carbide supply chain. So what's your intelligence on what the future might look like with respect to how we take this forward?
Do you mean more government funding and support?
Absolutely.
There's an element of we need to show that this is successful and we need to show this is working effectively. So some really good bids to this help us internally make the case for further funding. But yeah, at this stage, we are banging on every drum we can for more funding for this space.
Would you suggest then, as a follow-up to that we highlight the pathway to expansion of the supply chain in any bid to help you with that process?
Yeah, I wouldn't major on that, but yeah, if you can demonstrate that you can go bigger and better if given more funding, then that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh.
But I wouldn't suggest that should form a core part of what you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Taylor from CPI. My question relates to the industry in kind or match funding.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption is that any industry in kind would not be open access. Is that correct?
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, suppose a company lends its line
Mm-hmm.
as its match. Does that mean anyone can roll up and go into the doors of private companies?
No.
No. Good. Thank you.
I promise it's the last question, Matt. But and the team will understand the background to this. I just wonder, are you interested in foreign inward investment to support this? And so I guess the key is as long as it creates a UK capability.
Yes.
And you know, in some cases in previous programs, it's been rather difficult to get that through the gate of the finance departments. Okay. So I just hope that that's not going to be the case in future.
So do you mean our finance, so UK RI?
I mean UKRI, and I think you understand that situation.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. If there's no other questions, then we'll move on. But keep them coming throughout the day, and certainly if you have any thoughts, just email them in to us. I assume there's an email address somewhere that everyone has. So probably Martin or myself, and we'll take those away and get back to you as quickly as we can. So we're now going to pass over to talk about the competition process.
Thank you. So as Ben and Matt have both said, and as I think all of you have realised, this isn't a standard Innovate UK Article 25 CR&D competition. So it is quite different in the way it's set up, both in terms of how you'll be asked to explain that you're fulfilling the state aid criteria and the questions that will be asked and the way you'll be asked to submit those to us. So I'll quickly touch on the eligibility criteria. Ben's already detailed most of those in his presentation. I'll run through the application questions and the process, the application finances, which are again quite different to an IFS competition, submitting your application, the assessment process, and what will be required of you if you are successful. There'll then be the opportunity at the end for either of you to ask me any questions or if you have any further questions for Ben or Matt. So in terms of the eligibility criteria, I won't go through these again. They're just there as a reminder for you. If you are in a collaborative bid, then the lead and at least one other organisation must claim grant funding from us. And you can also include partners that do not receive any grant funding within your application, and their costs will count towards your total eligible project costs. Obviously, these will be available for you to refer back to, and the eligibility criteria are all available in the competition information online. So in terms of state aid, these are the criteria that you will be funded under. It's up to you to describe how you fulfil those criteria, and Innovate UK aren't able to advise you on those. So if you're unsure, please seek independent legal advice and make sure that you're compliant with the requirements before you submit your proposal. In terms of the key dates for this timeline, for this competition, obviously it opened last week. The briefing events today. As this isn't being run through IFS, you'll be required to register before you can submit an application. The registration deadline is a week ahead of the close date, so it's noon on the 27th of November, and then the submission deadline is noon on the 4th of December. Those are absolute deadlines, so if you haven't completed that step in the process by noon, you won't be able to submit your bid. You need to make sure that all the information is there before you click submit. We can't accept any additional information after the deadline. And similarly, the registration link will disappear at noon on that date, so please make sure you do it well in advance. If you're successful and proceed to interviews, those are in the week commencing the 20th of January. We'll confirm exact dates nearer the time, and then we anticipate that we'll inform applicants on the 21st of February. So in terms of the application process itself, so this is being run through an FTP site, which if you've applied into competitions with Innovate UK a while ago, this was kind of the pre-runner of IFS, so you may be familiar with this process. So as I've said, you'll need to register to receive your application form, and this will be emailed to you. So please make sure that you do that by the deadline. Once you are within the public area, you'll be able to see finance forms. There are also some sample collaboration agreements and other documents that might be useful to you. You can download these documents from that site. There's only a requirement for the lead applicant to register, and they can then distribute the finance forms as appropriate. However, if any of you are collaboration partners and want to register, then you're entirely welcome to do so. Please just bear in mind that when it comes to uploading, we will require all the documents in the one place, and they will need to be submitted by the lead applicant. You'll then have a secure area to upload your forms back to us. So you'll click login, you'll receive secure login details when you get your application form within that email. And this is where you'll upload any documents that you want to receive, that you upload everything that you want to submit before the deadline. And please be aware that we can't accept anything else. We can't accept documents via email. They all have to be transferred by this platform. Please bear in mind that you won't receive confirmation emails once you've uploaded documents. So if you're unsure if things have been successful, the best way to check is to log out, log back in, and make sure they're there in that area. It's really high tech. So I've somehow managed to duplicate this slide, but you don't actually have to fill in the application form twice. So there is very detailed guidance available in a guidance for applicants document relating to each individual question and the information that you're required to include within each one. It's quite a lengthy document, but I'd really recommend that you read it in detail before you start working on your application form. There are bullet points within each question kind of that relate to the key points that we're looking for, and those will also be reflected in the guidance that we give to the assessors, so they'll be the things that they're looking to pull out of your responses. There's also detailed guidance relating to the appendices that you're allowed to submit. So appendices are optional for each question. There are specific details in terms of the size, the format, and the information that we require in these documents. Please bear in mind that they should be used to support your answer, not to continue your answer. So you should use the space on the application form to give your answer, and then use those appendices to provide us with the supporting information that we've requested. You need to make sure that you follow the naming convention when you are submitting your appendices. This is really important because when we send out the applications to the assessors, they will see that title. So please make sure that it's named with your application number so that we make sure that the assessors review the correct information relating to your bid. There are some standard details that you're asked for. So you'll be asked for your application details, your project summary, your public description, and the scope, as you would be in any of our standard competitions. Please bear in mind when you're writing your public description that this will be published if your bid is successful. So don't include any commercially sensitive information or any information that you wouldn't be happy to see in the public domain. When you're writing your scope section, it's important to note that if your project isn't in the scope of this competition, then it won't be eligible for funding. And it's also useful for the assessors to read this section. They won't be scoring it, but they'll use it to kind of get a feel for your bid, what your aims are and what you're trying to achieve. So in terms of the finances. So on the FTP site, there is a finance summary table, which you'll be required to fill in, as well as the finance form for each application partner. So only the lead needs to complete this high-level document. And in it, you just need to detail each of your consortium partners and what their funding is, what their level of funding is within the project. It's very important that the information on this document matches the information that you then submit in your finance forms. If it doesn't, it can hold up your project starting, because the finance team will be required to ask you a lot of questions about which information is actually correct and how it is that there's a discrepancy. So in terms of the finance form itself, this is available to download via the FTP site. So each organisation that is claiming a grant must complete a project finance form. As I said, the lead is then required to upload those with the application. The application form itself is split into two separate areas, so capital costs and operating costs. Please make sure there are some similarities between the two. I'll run through them in a minute. But please make sure that you put costs within the right section. Again, if you don't, it just leads to further queries at project setup and can delay the start of your project. The form must show the status complete before you're able to submit it. So if it doesn't show the status complete, it will be deemed to be incomplete when we're looking at bids, and it may hold up the process. If any tabs aren't applicable to your particular project, then please just select no. That will then filter through to the front sheet, and it will mean that you'll be able to complete the entire document. So in terms of what you shouldn't be putting on your finance form, costs incurred by the centres during I think I might have got that wrong. No, that's right. So you shouldn't include costs incurred by the centres during the operational phase after 31st of March 2024, so once grant funding has ended. Instead, these should be listed in your response to question 9 on the application form, and there's detailed guidance on question 9 in terms of what you should be including and what we're looking for in terms of your future projections. You also shouldn't include any in-kind financial support, so this form is only for costs directly incurred by the partners within your consortium. And please bear in mind that for this competition, capital utilisation costs of existing assets are not deemed eligible. So where you have existing assets owned by the centres and your consortium partners, and where they're being made available to be used by the centres in their operations, it can be recorded as an in-kind contribution and counted towards the industry leverage figure, but shouldn't be included within this finance form. So these are just a quick overview of the tabs that you'll be asked to complete. There is detailed guidance available online about what will constitute an eligible cost within each category, so I'd suggest that you refer to that if you're in any way unsure. So you'll be asked to fill in capital equipment, property capital costs, capitalised labour, and it's important to note that here there is a capitalised labour tab and an operating labour tab. So this should only be for any labour costs specifically associated with capital build, for example, technicians to get equipment up and running, and does not include day-to-day labour costs in terms of running your facility. There's also then just another tab, so in this you should list any costs that don't directly fit into any of the other more detailed tabs. With both the other capital costs and the other operating costs, please make sure that you're not double counting any figures. So please make sure that they are genuinely not counted in any of the other tabs. You've then got operational labour costs. So these should all be staff working directly on the project. They should all be paid by PAYE. And you can't include any dividends, bonuses, or non-productive time within this tab. So in terms of overheads, as with all Innovate UK competitions, there are 2 ways that you can calculate your overheads. So you can either use 20% of your labour costs, or you can calculate them manually. If you choose to calculate them manually, there'll be a simple form that's available to you. In terms of overheads, they are split into indirect and direct overheads. So if you have any indirect overheads, please ensure that they are additional and directly attributable to the delivery of the project. And also please make sure for any direct overheads that you provide a detailed breakdown together with methodology of apportionment. You can also then include any materials that are being directly used in the project. Please make sure that you include as much detail as you can within this section of the form. Sometimes we'll just see kind of very basic information. If you do submit with that kind of without the required level of detail, the finance team will be querying what exactly it is you're buying, the quantity you're buying, and what you're using it for within the project before they authorise any costs. So the more detail that you can give us up front, the better, and the smoother the process will be later down the line. You can also include subcontracting costs, provided that they're justified and quantifiable. So within this tab, you'll need to detail any subcontractors working on your project, including the name, where the work will be carried out, and a description of their role within the project. If your subcontracting costs are going to be significant, then you'll need to justify who, why, and what you need them for, both here and within your application form. And please remember that the assessors won't see this level of detailed finances when they're marking your proposals, so ensure that your justification for subcontracting is clearly articulated within the answers to your questions on the application form. There's also then a tab for travel and subsistence costs. So this should only be for travel that's directly linked to the project. It should only be at economy class. And please be aware that any sales and marketing activities are ineligible and therefore should not be included. There's also then an other tab. So this is just for anything that doesn't fit into the previous categories. As I said, please make sure that you're not double counting costs. So in terms of assessment and next steps, so this will go out for assessment to 5 independent assessors who will provide feedback and scores on the responses to your questions. Please make sure that you give clear and concise answers, and please make sure that you quantify your answers and provide justification where appropriate. The assessors aren't able to go and do any background digging, so please make sure that you include all the information that you want them to review as part of your proposal. Don't assume that they're going to have knowledge of something you're talking about. Make sure that you explain why it's applicable to your project and how it is that it's benefiting your proposal. As always, you'll be provided with feedback once we've received the scores and once this has been moderated, as I talk about in a couple of slides' time. So please bear in mind when you're reviewing your feedback that it is compiled using the comments that have been provided by independent assessors and that their viewpoints may differ slightly. So we ask them to be constructive and to highlight both the strong and weak areas of your application. We don't ask them to kind of pull it apart in terms of demoralising you, but we do ask them to look at areas that you can improve on within the proposal. It's also worth bearing in mind that some proposals may have appeared to be favourably assessed based on their comments, and in those instances it could just be that other proposals scored a higher overall mark and therefore they've been selected to proceed to the next stage as opposed to your proposal. So in terms of reviewing the scoring, we review all the scores and feedback to check that assessors are adhering to our guidelines and are scoring fairly and using the guidance that we've provided to them as well as the matrix that we give them based on the criteria that we're looking for in a response to each question. In some cases, we may identify outlier scores, and where we feel that a score is unjust and not supported by the feedback that the assessor has provided, then we may remove that score and recalculate the total for the application. So please be aware that if we do that, we'll do it for both high and low outliers, so it's not just looking at kind of the bottom end. So scores may increase or decrease as a result of that process. So this is just a little bit more detail on that process. So this is an excerpt from a panel sheet, which is the sheet that we compile once we've received all the assessor scores back. The left-hand score shows the score for a particular application, and the highlighted column shows the score spread, which is the difference between the top and bottom scores. So in this instance, we'd look at all 3 of the scores that are highlighted, as it would indicate that there's quite a significant score spread between the top and the bottom assessor. We'd also look at the count of no scope and the count of no to recommend. So we ask the assessors to establish whether they feel that your proposal is within the scope of the competition, and we also ask them to say yes or no, they would recommend it for funding. If the majority of the assessors feel that it's out of scope or wouldn't recommend it, so in this instance 3 out of 5, then it wouldn't proceed any further and it wouldn't be eligible for funding. So in terms of outliers, so the green box here highlights a particular assessor's score on an application, and the purple box highlights a set of scores for a particular question. So we look for a difference of 20 or more when considering the assessor's total score to identify an outlier. So in this particular instance, the one that's highlighted red, so 62, would be considered an outlier and would be reviewed together with the feedback to see if that was justified and if the score was backed up by the feedback that the assessor had provided. So in terms of the next step, if your project is successful at written stage, then you will be asked to attend an interview. As I mentioned earlier, these are in the week commencing the 20th of January. So you can bring up to 9 people to attend the interview from your consortium. You'll have 40 minutes to present a maximum of 40 PowerPoint slides, and you can't include any videos or embedded links within your presentation. There'll then be the opportunity for the panel to ask you any questions, and that session will also be 40 minutes. Ahead of the interviews, you'll have the opportunity to respond to the written feedback that you received, and that will be given to the panel ahead of the interview session so that they can read it and digest your responses. Your response to feedback, presentations, and the names of the people that will be attending will need to be provided to Innovate UK ahead of the interview, and we won't be able to make any changes to those documents once you've submitted them to us. So in terms of project setup, if your proposal is successful at interview stage, so we're aiming to notify on the 21st of February. As this is an FTP competition, the process is again slightly different. So the lead applicant will be notified by email of the decision. There'll then be some steps that you will have to go through, and all grant claiming partners will have to go through this process in order to satisfy the requirements of kind of financial and eligibility and viability checks and proceed to the next stage. So at this point, you'll probably be asked to provide some additional information to us. It's important that you respond to our queries as quickly as possible. It just delays the start of your project if you don't provide the information that we're asking for. So it's kind of really on you to help us get through that process as quickly as possible. Feedback will also be provided to you via your secure FTP site. So again, the lead will be notified when feedback is available, and then it's then up to them to distribute that within your consortium as you feel appropriate. This will be uploaded to your FTP site within 4 weeks of notification being sent. In terms of project setup, there are some key questions that tend to hold projects up, so it's important that you start thinking about those as early as possible. So if you start thinking about who will be your project manager, who will be the finance contact for each consortium member, so that's particularly important as it's quite often getting financial information that really holds up projects starting. So if you can nominate a finance contact early on, they'll be the one that project finance will speak to and they'll complete the viability and eligibility checks with. So if you think about that early, rather than kind of waiting to hear until if you're successful or otherwise, then it can really speed up the process. And also start thinking about how your consortium will be set up and looking towards drafting a collaboration agreement. It's also worth bearing in mind for this competition that the winning proposal will form a major part of the delivery of the overall Driving the Electric Revolution challenge, and as such will be expected to work with other parts of the programme in a collaborative manner. So there's going to be a commitment from you moving forwards if you're successful, as Matt talked about earlier on. In terms of your collaboration agreement, so this is something that really frequently holds projects up because it can be quite contentious. So there are just some key elements on the slide here that we'd recommend that you start thinking about as soon as possible, so while you're putting your bid together, and it will hopefully reduce delays later on in the process. Please bear in mind that we can't issue a grant offer letter, and therefore your project can't start if we don't have a signed collaboration agreement in place. So it is a really important part of the project setup. In terms of the grant claims and payments, so all our grants are claimable quarterly in arrears. So you need to bear in mind that when you're starting the first couple of months of your project, that your first grant payment won't come in until slightly later on. Claims can only be made for costs incurred and paid between the project start and end dates, and claims may be subject to an independent audit according to the grant size. Your claim will only be paid once quarterly reporting and necessary audits are complete. And obviously, as with any Innovate UK project, you'll be assigned a monitoring officer, and they'll work with you to make sure that that process runs smoothly. Monitoring will be carried out against a detailed project plan and financial forecast, as always. So you need to make sure that kind of your costs at this point are as rigid as they can be. Obviously, we understand that things change, but if you can make sure that things match as much as possible, it will make for a much smoother process. And in terms of contact details, so as Ben has already said, both he and Martin are available. Alternatively, you can contact Innovate UK directly. The details are there on screen. So we have a customer support service. They're available from 9 till 5:30 Monday to Friday via the number on screen, or you can email them at support@innovateuk.ukri.org. So if you're unsure what your query relates to or who's the best person to answer it, if you email that email address, they'll be able to pass your query over to the correct team and get a response to you. That's the end. So if anyone has any questions relating to either that section of the presentation or to anything previous.
One quick question. Simple question, hopefully. Matt and Ven have talked about business development resource and that the centres clearly want to drive that business development really hard, to, particularly FDI context, for example. But you talked about in terms of the eligible costs that T&S for BD won't be covered.
So,
when you talk in the finance sheets, you said travel and subsistence would not cover business development activities.
no, it was sales and marketing activities. They're
Okay.
never eligible under grant funding.
But BD would be classed, wouldn't be classed as sales and marketing, that would be classed under normal OPEX.
That's my...
I can't answer that question right now, but I would say yes. It's something we've asked you to do, is the BD activity.
Yeah, so it's just sales and marketing that are ineligible.
We will need to clarify that, though. But
If we don't have any other... Oh, hello, sorry.
Shouted. Would universities have to submit the JES application as well, or are they tied up to the...
If you are JES registered, then yes, we would require a JES form to be submitted as well via the standard process. If you're not JES registered, then you don't need to go down that route.
Tied up with the deadline as well?
You would need to submit it together with the application, so you'd need to provide it to the lead applicant, and they would upload it together with your application. And as always, it would need to have the with council status, so you'd need to have sent it on to them.
Just following up on that, does that mean that academic partners don't need to submit a finance form, or do they need to do both?
You would need to do both.
Do both,
Yeah.
okay.
Any other questions for Bumba? Steve, that's the wrong answer. Could be in the book. No, go on.
Hi, Steve Nesbitt, the Manufacturing Technology Centre. Capital equipment, there was a requirement that new assets were commissioned, installed, up and running within 18 months. But we're working on defrayed costs quarterly retrospectively. An awful lot of enterprises such as ourselves, RTOs, don't have the cash in the bank to be able to make those commitments ahead of time. So what mechanism may exist for us to get some advance funding, as it were, for that, which we've done on other ISCF challenge programmes before?
We can double check that for you. So it's not our standard process to pay anything up front. However, I understand your concerns about having to obviously wait until your first grant payment comes in. If you email into us, we can pass it on to the project finance team. They'd be the ones who'd make any decisions regarding that sort of thing. At this point, we're assuming that there won't be any exemptions, that it will all be paid as standard quarterly in arrears, and that you will need to cash flow the first 3 months of the project. But as I say, if you email in, we can get a definite answer for you.
And to be clear, we wouldn't want that type of issue to get in the way of successful launch. So if there's anything like that or anything else, do tell one of us and we can see what we can do here.
Given my last reaction to Steve's question, are there any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Bimba.
Yeah, go on. Go on. Sorry, that wasn't... Ven's just going to have to go quickly, and Ellie's going to pick up his interviews after lunch. On a personal note, I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's not the easiest venue to get to or find, Martin. But it's really important that this set of centres gets up and running as quickly as possible. And whilst there is a desire in Innovate and ISCF in particular to ensure that you get as much latitude as you want, I will be encouraging you to get the centres up and running as quickly as possible, which includes Matt in a car coming to see you. I am aware that there will be questions that people won't want to raise their hand in a public forum and ask, so I am around all afternoon. I'll be here until gone 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, so anybody wants to badger me or pigeonhole me, that's entirely possible. We are running a little ahead of schedule because you didn't ask enough questions. Incentivised by my good self, I suspect. But if there are any other questions for the public forum, then please ask them now. Okay. Ben, there's a
Do the questions have to be DER related?
It
I'm
would
just
be
wondering whether we
helpful.
can have a pub quiz.
I mean, the future of the human race and all that kind of stuff I can answer. Go on.
Linked investment,
Mm-hmm.
linked industry investment following a project is a very hard thing to demonstrate during a bidding process.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we should go about that?
That's a very good question. We are, as you might expect, given the targets that we are being asked to achieve, very interested in what happens after money is spent. There is, in Dr. Cherrington, a bucket into which all sorts of things can flow. And he is the fount of all knowledge on what would qualify and how you might go about assessing it after, or during and after the competition. So see Martin at some point this afternoon. Or, Martin, do you want to answer that question now? Please get, let's see, typical. But there will be we'll also answer that in the FAQ. Paul? Thank you. Sprint. That should be good for a laugh.
Just for clarity's sake, so we need to leverage 82 million. Total project costs of up to 50 million with a 30 million grant, up to 30 million grant. Does that 20 million difference in terms of the project costs, so we've got, does that count as the industry leverage towards that ultimate figure of 82 million? Or
Yes.
It does, yeah.
Martin's nodding his head furiously, yes.
Great, cool, thank you.
Hi, Richard Francis, Sheffield. Just for clarity on the academic partners submitting a JES form, are academic partners also required to submit letters of support, expected to, encouraged?
That's a very good question. And the answer to that is yes, please.
Okay. Thanks.
This is good. I can answer these questions. Anything else? This is Matt filling, by the way, because your lunch isn't due until 12:45. Have we rearranged that? 12 o'clock. Okay. Gary, I don't think you need anything more, mate. Are there any other questions? Yep, Mark.
For the centres, the lead applicant, can it be from industry, academia or RTOs?
Yes. Any other filling questions? At the back?
What have I missed?
Have
you got time to go through a little bit again?
It's a very good question. The answer is probably not, given that it was 100 and how many slides? Driving the Electric Revolution, a programme, a challenge to create by 2025 £5 billion more power electronics machines and drives in the UK across 7 sectors. And the 7 sectors are aerospace, automotive, industrial, rail. Now, see, I've gotten out of my rhythm. Energy, industrial drives, and marine. Tom, make me look good.
I've got a question that I think is quite hard to answer, but I suspect it's on a lot of people's minds. We've operated a number of models, different models, CR&D, etc. And this is related to the timing of the matched funding, because in this model, most centres will have a capital spend at the start, and then the matched funding will flow in during a period of time. So most of us will be looking at that, and my question really is, to what extent do you want to see evidence that the matched funding is hard committed on day one from the industry, or over a period of time? And then related to that is, what are your clawback provisions if a centre doesn't achieve its target? Because some of these competitions have quite strict clawback clauses.
I think if we're in clawback, we've failed. And if there is a lot of work has already gone on to ensure that these centres are successful. And I think that needs to continue. Specifically on clawback, and I'm now looking at Martin, there aren't any clawback provisions in the competition scope at this point, are there? No. I don't like failure, and I'm going to work damn hard to ensure that's not where we end up. As far as the industry support and the capital, it would be good to ensure that industry is supportive of the location, supportive of the access to the capability, and can indicate how much or how little it can support in the fullness of time the capability that we're raising. So yes, I take your point about capital investment up front, operating kind of over the next 3 or 4 years. That is what it is, I'm afraid.
I think the industry is crying out for this. You'll get industry support into this. I don't think that the industry desire, drive and determination to make this an absolute success is a problem.
Yeah.
I don't see us needing to be planning down that route, but failure is not really an option.
You know, when the economists have been putting numbers together for electrification, you might imagine that some of the numbers are actually incredible. Some of the numbers are quite scary, because those numbers have to be achieved over a very short period of time. If you're talking about producing no internal combustion engine vehicles by 2040. That is no time in automotives timescales. Aerospace as well. Marine, they do a lot already. Rail, you know, it's a big job. And the opportunity for the people in this room is enormous. I remember a long time ago getting involved in a drives business, thinking to myself, and I was told by my chairman, eventually electric cars will come because they make sense. I waited 20 years, but they're here. And they need a supply chain. And yes, Gary's just pointing the fact that the demand is actually ballistic. So I don't think we're going to fail. I think if we get the sort of levels of industry support that we've been promised, I don't think that's a problem. And certainly my discussions with industry over the last couple of months in all of the sectors have been very, very encouraging that this competition and others will be essential to helping them achieve electrification in the time scales that have been set them. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Now, to what extent are we thinking about coalescence with other relevant ISCF structures like the Faraday? I mean, you know, we're seeing in our industry a coalescence between battery technology and semicon technology, for example. Mm-hmm. So again, you know, I'm not asking you to look down the crystal ball, but is that discussion going on at the moment as to how we bring these two parallel strands together, because they are so related that we're going to have to at some point?
Yeah. So that is. There isn't a plan to do a structural coalescence, but we're all, one of the people who I regularly talk to is Tony Harper, because we're essentially trying to achieve the same thing. We can't do it independently. It's all very well getting a power source, but power source needs to be delivering power to something you can use, and vice versa. I keep pulling his leg that I'm looking for fuel cell solutions rather than batteries. He's not having that. Anything else? I am very conscious that I have filled for 8 minutes. I have 2 minutes to go, and then you can have your lunch. So one more question, anybody? Yes.
Just to clarify, didn't the scope say that the project has to be led by industry?
Sorry?
Yeah, just to clarify, didn't during the scope of the competition they mentioned that the projects have to be led by industry?
Well, right. So this is a popular misnomer. Industry-led, yes, because that's where the demand is. The support of academia is a given. The support of RTOs is a given. But the demand, the pull for this technology, the pull for these solutions has to come from industry. So it's industry-led. Okay. On my watch, it says 11:59 and 30 seconds. So given that, I thank you very much. I will be around, as I said, all day. Lunch should be served outside the main door. Your opportunity to networking is for another hour. And then we'll have the one-to-ones. Okay?
Yeah. Can I just ask if anybody's got one-to-one?